I'm Daniel J. Lewis, and I'm pleased to introduce our next session, which is from our platinum sponsor, Blubrry. They'll be talking about the top things podcasters should know about their podcast. Blubrry has been so instrumental in the podcasting industry with the PowerPress plugin that they make for WordPress, which so many tens of thousands of podcasters use, and their premium podcasting stats, analytics, hosting, and so much more that Blubrry offers. So we're thrilled to have them as a platinum sponsor for International Podcast Day. And here, they're going to share some great information for podcasters that you need to know, and there are going to be some cool surprises for this. So you won't want to miss a single minute of this. Several members of the Blubrry team are here to present to you, and I'll hand it over to the CEO from Blubrry and Raw Voice, Todd Cochran, to then introduce the rest of his team and start the presentation. So Todd and the team from Blubrry, thank you so much for joining us, and it's over to you.
Yay, we're here. It's
Hello.
So everyone, welcome to our presentation. Of course, I'm Todd Cochran, the founder of Blubrry. I'll let the other two introduce themselves. We don't have to have like an official crazy introduction.
Okay. So I'm Mckenzie Bennett. I am the marketing services coordinator with Blubrry. Been here about 4 years out of how many years that Blubrry has been in business? About 15 now?
14.
14?
Yep. And I'm Mike Dell. I'm the customer support manager. There we go. I keep changing titles. I have to remember. Anyway, I've been here for about 11 of those years, the last 3 or so full time.
So we've got a lot to share with you folks today. And of course, I think combined, we've probably got 30 plus years of podcasting experience on the line here today. So I think we'll be able to give you all some insights. And I can't claim responsibility for this because Mike and McKenzie worked on our agenda. So I'm just going to kind of ad lib where we need to be.
Hey, that's how it works.
So, but we are going to, and I'm going to be back tonight at 8 p.m., 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern for a session on RSS and the future of podcasting and where we're going there. So I hope you tune into that. But anyway, Mike, what's the topic and what do we want to start on?
Well, we want to talk about, the things that you should know about your own podcast. And that may sound funny, but a lot of people hire things out. They hire out the production or they hire out the, a lot of the technical stuff. And a lot of podcasters just plain don't know these things. And, it's my thought, and I'm assuming everybody else's thought, that at least you should have the minimum amount of information about your own show, just in case, say the person that does all this stuff gets run over by a bus. I mean, it's a kind of a bad thing to say, but it can happen. So, go ahead.
And I think the thing that we see and what Mike and McKenzie deal with every day is that when people call in and they're needing help or pre-sales question or whatever it may be, we'll ask simple questions and folks won't know. So many of you will know many of these things. But if you're a new podcaster and you don't know these things, we want you to keep this list and write this down, or you too can help us with all these new podcasters coming in this space and making sure that they know this is really Podcast 101 basics at its core. So for some of you, this is going to be overly simple, but for some folks, you may not even. We'll take a poll at the end, and we'll see how many of you actually didn't know one of these topics. So why don't you start off, Mike, or McKenzie, why don't you start off with our first item?
Okay. So we're going for technical first to get the bulk of what podcasting is out of the way, the nuts and bolts of it. So first thing we want to make sure that people know is who is hosting your website? Where is that coming from?
Yeah,
and then
so many times with this, I'll get somebody and I'll ask them, they say, well, I have a WordPress site. And I ask them, well, who's hosting that? And they'll go, WordPress.
Yep.
Okay. Is it WordPress.com or is it anybody else? And then they finally figure it out. Basically I have to ask them, who do you write the check to, or who charges you to have that web space?
And that could end up being GoDaddy,
Yeah,
Bluehost,
100 of them.
DreamHost, or
We get a
Soup.
ton that are super confused between Blubrry and Bluehost too.
Yeah.
They don't realize we're two different things and we have two different purposes.
So
Right.
if you're really following the Blubrry way of podcasting, which we hope all of you will, you'll have already had your own website before you started podcasting or launched your own .com when you started your podcast. With Google Podcast and everything that's going on today and all the SEO indexing, if you don't have your own website, you're truly being handicapped if you're on some vertical on some platform where you're at host du jour dash some address. So we want to make sure everyone is on their own .com. Little sales pitch there. Sorry. So what's next there, Mike?
All right. Let me get back to the list. Who hosts your media files?
Yep.
And
You would think that.
yeah, you'd be surprised at the number of people that don't really know that that are doing their podcasting. Well,
Like a lot.
Yeah.
Like people want to migrate over to us and I ask them, okay, well, I can, send you documentation or kind of give you a brief overview. And they're like, I don't know where it is.
But your files and your website have to live somewhere. At least write down where that is. If you're not doing it yourself, because a lot of people are on networks or they just hire somebody to do everything for them. And there's nothing really wrong with that, but it's really good to know where the stuff is.
I'm not saying you have to know how it works, but
No.
what it is.
Yeah.
You would think if they were calling us that they would be hosting with us, but that's not always the case. Like saying is someone that's might be wanting to migrate and then oftentimes they'll have to go call their person that's doing this for them.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to have your person write all this stuff down for you and keep that in a doc. My pet peeve or my number one thing is I want to know, what is your RSS feed address? And the RSS feed is really, and if you want to equivalent to anything, it's your broadcast tower. It's how you syndicate, how your show gets consumed, or how your show gets not distributed but syndicated out by all the websites. So people don't even know what the RSS feed is, and that is, quite frankly, the number one most important thing a podcaster has. It's part of their intellectual property.
Yeah, I know someone's going to talk a whole hour about that later on.
Yeah.
So right along with that is where is the RSS feed generated?
Yeah, and that that's another thing. It could be from PowerPress. It could be back in the day. It's Todd and I will remember hand coding RSS feeds, writing XML. That still happens, believe it or not. Not very often, but people do it. Or your hosting company. So if you're not hosting with Blubrry, or even if you are, there is a way to generate an RSS feed from your hosting company. Your podcast media hosting company, not your what is it? Web hosting company. So.
Yeah. So the main thing there really is to know how that feed is created and who's doing it, whether it be Podbean, Libsyn, Simplecast, it doesn't matter, whoever the host du jour is, so that because you could, and theoretically, you could be hosting your show on your media on Podbean. You could have your own website using another application, and you could have 3 different locations where stuff is. You could have your media files one location, your feed another, and your website another. So you really need to know how that feed is being generated.
Yep. And let's see. One of the things I run into a lot is people don't know what their login is to Apple Podcasts. Now, they may not have that login for your listing. That's a whole nother problem. But at least know what email address that your Apple ID or your show is submitted at Apple. Because Apple, even though they're not all of podcasting, they're a good chunk of it. And with that information, you can go in there and, at least find out what's going on if your show disappeared from Apple or whatever. And that's one of the problems with some hosts out there, some media hosts that do that submission for you. So you really want to own that if you can, or at least know who owns that.
And I think, too, it's important that you do own that login and that you monitor the email in which you submitted that show under. Because if you have an issue, if Apple detects that there's a problem, they will, and if they delist you,
Mhm.
they will send you an email saying, hey, you've been delisted. And if you're not monitoring that email, and we know many of you never do, because we'll send emails to people and 4 weeks later, they will have discovered in their third alternate email account that we
Yeah.
emailed them, say, oh, I didn't know you were trying to reach us. That's how you're going to keep track. So don't use a throwaway email address. And we hope
Yeah.
that you're not anyway, because those of you that are iOS users are probably using that same username for buying app purchases. But some people do have separate logins that
Oh,
is
yeah.
not tied to your phone, that are tied to Apple Podcasts, especially for Android users too.
I love the email addresses I see sometimes. Don't spam me or else at yahoo.com or something like that. And they don't look at that. So, use an email address that you actually check at Apple if you can help it.
All right. So next up is we want to talk about where to check your stats and which stats are useful and which ones are not. We know that anytime we have a little, we'll call it a glitch with stats, or numbers go down dramatically on an episode, or, there's 500 different things people look at in their stats that people absolutely freak out, and they go into absolute meltdown mode. And this is where people get excited because they're checking their stats every 2 hours. They're saying, how come this hasn't updated? And different hosts across the space update stats at different times. We're on a 2 to 4 hour typical window to update stats, where stats aren't updated live, but you can refresh. For those that are pro, can refresh anytime. But there are certain stats that are important and some stats that are not important. Let's talk a little bit about download. I think that when you're looking at your episode by episode download over time, that is probably the best indicator of where your show is growing, because hopefully that line is doing is moving up over time. And if you get a nice slow growth over time, that extends out to years, being pretty significant. If your line is all over the place, it's up and down, well, then maybe you're having retention issues with your show. Maybe people are coming and checking your show out 2 or 3 times and they're leaving. So that download period over time, and looking at an episode that's been alive for 30 days, you're going to kind of see what that episode did. I think that's, for me at least, as a podcaster that's been at this for a while, that's what I look at the most. Mike, what do you look at?
Well, it's downloads per episode seems to be the main one, but a lot of other interesting things is geography. You can look up where people are listening. So, say you're looking at the U.S. and you find that most of them are in the Midwest. So then you can maybe tailor your content towards that or whatever. But some of the things that are not that important is, say, monthly downloads. Like, I get 20,000 downloads per month. Well, if you're going for advertising, per month doesn't really do anything, because really the person that advertises wants to know how many people downloaded the episode that had my ad in it. So it's still that episodic, per episode. But what I was trying to get at when I put this item in there too is just know where to look for your stats. Google Analytics is not a good indicator of podcast statistics.
That's what I was going to say. There is a very big difference between Google Analytics, which is just focused on your website and hits and anything that you have associated to that, but that is not anything to do with people actually downloading or streaming or playing your episode, especially if they're not even on your website. If they're getting this through an app or something like that, yes, definitely take a look at analytics from Google, but don't think they're the same thing.
Right. Podcast analytics are just podcast analytics, and web analytics are web analytics, and different parts of your podcast stats are useful and some are just interesting. But, don't confuse the two. Just because you got 20,000 visits to your site doesn't mean you're going to have 20,000 podcast plays. I wish that was the case, but most people just kind of bounce off a lot of times.
Another thing that, and I turn my volume up a little bit, hopefully it won't distort. If it is, let me know. one thing that I look at too is I look at how my podcast is being consumed. I look at
Mhm.
on an episode basis. I say how many people are on Apple Podcasts, how many people came in via Spotify. I look at all that to kind of get an idea how I'm doing from a host standpoint and driving listeners to all the platforms that we're consumed on. So if I see that we're lacking a little bit, maybe on Android, maybe I will push Google Podcasts a little more. I'll push an Android app um, within the show itself and also in the show note, because oftentimes people are going to discover you first. They're going to listen to the show and they're not necessarily going to subscribe right away. My goal is always to get them to subscribe. And I know there's some contention about that in the space, but in the end, that's the biggest indicator that someone loves your show and is going to stay with you for a period of time. So I think that, you have to look through your stats and dig data out from it and be able to make the programming decisions. We've got a new service now where we can actually see how much a partial download data. We can actually see when people have only went to like the 50% mark when they've actively played the show. And that really gives us an indication, well, maybe I got boring at 30 minutes of my 60-minute show. Maybe I need to step my game up at that point. So there's some things that you can do to look at your stats and be able to make good programming decisions.
Yep, definitely. Let's see. This is kind of my pet peeve, but know the logins and passwords to everything to do with your podcast, even if you're not doing it all yourself. Because so many times what happens is the person that you're dealing with, you're no longer dealing with, and they're holding you hostage because maybe you didn't pay the bill or who knows. But no, if you know all of the logins and passwords to everything, you should be able to keep control of it if the person that is helping you stops helping you. And the other thing,
as long as the email addresses are tied to that, they're yours as well.
Certainly, yeah. And the thing, another thing is, especially me in support, you don't know how much time I sit here waiting for somebody to get a password to log into something. And, so just know all that stuff, keep control of it, even if you're doing it all yourself. So make sure that's your email address, not somebody else's, and all that. And just make sure that stuff. Keep it close.
There's a lot of back end thought that goes into it of how you're going to organize it. Like I set up accounts all the time and I send them a certain set of questions asking all of this information of who do I contact about this or about this or about this, or like, what's the login going to be? And a lot of the time I get an email back saying, give me a day or two. I have to figure this out.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good reasons to have a home base for that.
We're going to move on. We're going to talk a little bit about editing and software. And, this is something as a content creator you need to pay attention to. And it's also will largely drive often your bill with companies like ours. Yep. We've had people call us in a mild panic and say, you told me that I could get this $20 account and I've used all my space up in the first month. Help me. And it turns out that they've encoded their MP3 at like 512 kilobits, or they've actually uploaded a WAV file versus an MP3. And so have an idea where you're encoding at. And some of those standard encoding rates are, 64K mono, 128K stereo, or 128K mono. So you know what you're encoding at so that you're not over, I guess for better words, having a file that's bigger than it needs to be to get the quality that you want. But also at the same time, are you encoding MP3? Are you doing M4A? Are you doing an MP4 if you're doing video, or are you doing M4V? Kind of know this. And this is and if you're hiring an outside firm to do your editing, which a lot of podcasters are doing now, you should tell them what you want your media file encoded at. This should be, and if they're smart, they will consult with you on that and let you know what they think you should encode at. If they don't, and maybe you shouldn't use them as an editor.
Yeah,
But
I always say to people, 128 stereo is a good kind of standard. That gives you about 1 minute of audio per megabyte of space. And, unless you're doing jazz or classical music, you may not even need stereo. Most people won't even notice stereo versus mono, especially if it's just mainly talking, because you're using one microphone in most cases. So, that is a mono.
And most people are listening with some type of crappy earbuds or
Yeah.
in their car or on a smart speaker. So it's not like you're getting super high quality listening anyway.
Yeah. I used to say 64 mono unless you're doing jazz or classical, but some of the platforms now require you to be at least at 96 kilobaud, so 96 kbps.
Like Spotify and some of the other folks, they want you to be a little higher quality on the audio file going in, because if they're caching, they're re-encoding that file on their end, and it's usually they're stuffing it down.
Lower level, yeah.
Yeah, so the better quality going in, the better quality it sounds when it's actually put on their service. So, I'm pretty much at this point personally doing 128K stereo. I don't know why. I could go to 128K mono, and actually that when it's at 128K mono sounds great.
Oh yeah, it's an awesome sound, because 64 mono is the same as 128 stereo generally. Right. Because it's and you're still getting in both ears, but if you kick that up to 128, you don't lose any size, but you double the quality.
Another thing too to consider is what program are you going to use to record, edit, and encode your media files. I've used Adobe Audition for years. We've got folks that are using Himalaya now because of the integration and automatic publishing to some podcast hosts. Got folks that are still using Audacity. We even have people contact us from time to time. They're using GarageBand, and it's free. I understand,
it works,
but it works. But I don't like editing in GarageBand. Yeah. It's no fun.
And then there's some of us that don't even use software at all for recording. Right now, I'm using a Rodecaster, but I also have a hardware recorder. I know you do in the studio there, McKenzie, and I think Todd, you have the same recorder too. So.
Yeah.
We've all do hardware recording as well, either as a backup or the primary.
Yeah, I only record now to a Denon. Same thing we've got in the studio, Denon hard recorder. And then I used to have a backup running Adobe Audition when I was actually recording live, but I don't run a backup now. I'm sure that's going to bite me at some point. But anyway, that, picking good software, I also found too, is that if you're running into issues where you're having a hard time editing, maybe you should check some other applications out. It shouldn't be any harder than you really like editing in a word processor. It's cut, paste, chop, cut, that type of stuff. And then we always finish out, at least I do, I use the software version of Aphonic to finish my WAV file. That's the last process I run on my editing, what little editing I do. Run WAV file through Aphonic to be at
what is this edit you talk about, Todd?
Yeah, cutting the ends. And,
see, you guys are not really editing people, and I am a person that appreciates it much more than you do. So, in terms of learning it, I think there's a lot of good reasons to learn how to do the quick chop, cut and paste, add in your intros and outros. But if you want to do something that's a little more sophisticated and add in an ad or an interview or put in transition music or something like that, this is one of those things that I definitely think is worthwhile to pay someone else to do. If you truly hate it, or if it's going to be like taking all of your time, this is it. This is the thing to outsource.
I edit every week, so we're it happens.
The level of editing, yes.
My editing takes 5 minutes, but also, there's also a personal choice there.
Oh yeah.
And I think that you can go both ways. Some people can't handle it without editing. I personally would no longer be podcasting if I had to edit, because I just didn't have the time. It'd have been ugly, and in the days when the kids were growing up and all that, if I had to spend a couple hours editing, I would have been, computer and all would have been thrown out the door along with my clothes. So it was a survival marriage survival tactic for me was not to edit and just become a better podcaster and have a better pipeline of audio.
I understand.
But again, if you want to edit, more power to you. If you hire someone to edit, there's 100 people that will. I'm sure we've heard from some of those on International Podcast Day here. Distribution and syndication. So, Mike, the number one thing that podcasters need to know is that podcasts are pushed, right?
Yeah, right. No, podcasting is a pull technology. It's not a push. You know, I was trying to find a good analogy. It's like your podcast is on the end of a rope. Try to push that. It ain't gonna happen. It's being pulled into all of the directories.
I think we came up with a good email one at one point of you send someone in an email, but unless your email service is picking up what you're doing, like
Right.
what is happening and getting recent emails, and the other person's not going to get it.
Right. It's like the old POP3 email. The email could be sitting in the email box forever until your app goes out and pulls that email into your computer so you can read it.
And it's really, this is from years and years of getting emails from people screaming at us, how come you haven't pushed our episode to Apple yet? And we have to go through this dialogue. So you, as seasoned podcasters or a new podcaster out there, now know that Apple and all the other platforms pull your show from your feed and update on their schedule. And you can help us by advocating this globally so we don't get these 20 times a week. And literally, we do. And it's just because the podcasters are starting today just don't do any research whatsoever. They don't learn about the basic stuff that happens in podcasting. So you can help us here eliminate this travesty of misknowledge out there. So it's a little fun to kind of tease on this, but it's truly in the end, as long as the media gets to Apple Podcasts and all their locations, you're happy, right?
Oh, yeah.
But
and once it gets in your feed, it'll get to all those places eventually.
And if people are subscribed, then they're going to be able to get that episode sooner.
Oh, yeah.
Instantly.
Right, pretty much right away. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But I did skip one thing we were going to talk about is, where can your podcaster be found? So there's lots of places now to really be distributed to.
sure. The thing about it is, know where you've submitted it. And then, and know that you can submit it to a lot of places. Our main suggestions would be like Apple, Spotify, Google, which I'll explain in a minute, TuneIn, Stitcher, Deezer. Google, you don't really submit to anymore. Google is by search. And so if your podcast website is searchable with the feed on it in a particular way, Google will find you fairly quickly. Sometimes it can take a month, and that really kind of surprises people because Google's sort of acting backwards from what everybody else was doing, but who knows? So don't expect to be able to quote unquote submit to Google. There is still Google Play, but that's really close to going away completely. In fact, I just heard something today. I think James had it on his newsletter that Google Play is no longer going to be part of the Android load on the next version. It's going to be Google or YouTube Music or something like that.
So I think too is that the Google situation, and going back to the comments I made earlier, is that you will definitely be found faster if you have established website already. But if you're coming out of the gate with a brand new website, there are certain things you have to have on that website for Google to index you. You're pretty safe if you're on some of the other platforms that are locked in verticals where you're kind of on their ecosystem, where they kind of control your brand and your look and feel. They have all that taken care of already, and you'll get picked up over there as well. But when you're starting on your own brand new website, we've got some functions within PowerPress to help speed that process up. It's called WePub Sub. It's a setting in PowerPress that basically pings Google every time you send a new episode or publish a new episode. So that helps. But yeah, you just have to be a little patient with Google Podcast and make sure you have a little content on your website. Don't have just like one sentence of show notes, write a couple of paragraphs that are on the topic of your show that gives Google something to bite into and say, should I start looking at this site? Should I actually start indexing it? If you already have an established site, well, you're probably already able to be found and you'll get picked up a lot quicker.
Yep. And like I said, brand new websites, just like any other brand new website, takes a while to get into the Google search, and therefore it'll take a while to get into Google Podcasts.
So directory and apps, let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, all the directories and apps have different requirements. And just know that because it worked on Apple doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work on Spotify or vice versa. Spotify has a very particular requirement based on the description that others don't seem to mind. And just all of them are different. It's a different procedure with like, what is it? TuneIn, you have to fill out a form. Stitcher, you have to do this other form. And, it's not one size fits all to get it into all the directories. Our podcast manual over at create.blubrry.com has all the information on how to submit to the different places. Just type submit to, and then whatever you want to submit to in the search. And we have an article about that. But,
in sites like iHeart and Pandora, they're slowly adding shows. Some people have applied at iHeart and it's taken as much as like 9 months to get listed. They've started to pick the pace up a little bit. Pandora as well. Pandora is being selective on who they add, but they're starting to open up the gate and get people approved faster as well. A new entrance to space is Deezer. Many of you say, what? But those of you that in Europe, probably they're watching today or later, know that Deezer is, it's not as popular as Spotify, but it's definitely another platform out there. What's interesting is Deezer bought Stitcher, and then Deezer sold Stitcher to Midroll. I think that's, or whoever bought it.
Something like that, yeah.
Or and then Scripps. And then now Deezer is trying to get back in the podcasting game again. It's completely crazy. But matter of fact, I think they had a press release that went out today, or shortly it's going to talk about the podcast on Deezer. So that's just another place for people to find you. Again, it's all about, we don't care where people listen. We just want them to listen. That's the key, and having our shows as wide as possible in as many locations as possible. So, but again, these apps and requirements again are a little bit different. Take your time. Make sure that you don't rush if you're having to fill out an application. Take your time to submit a good application, a good description. It should be consistent across all platforms on what you're submitting. So, oftentimes, maybe the description you put in, for example, PowerPress for the show description, maybe in cut and paste and use that. But tailor it a little bit, and because it's important. And each site is indexed a little bit different by Google and how you may be found. So maybe you can play around with the description a little bit from site to site. So maybe you come up in one search one way and another search another. So I've seen people use that strategy as well. So tactically, just don't get those distribution points set up, or syndication, I should say, sites set up, but take your time to get those filled out correctly, and don't rush through, because you'll get added over time. And but it's better to have a nice clean listing than to go in later and say, oh, I missed a comma, or I misspelled a word, which I often do. Make sure you have that data nice and clean before you hit the submit button.
Right. So yeah, it's funny. Different platforms take different amounts of time. Also, like you said with iHeart, it took me almost a year to get on iHeart, and then when we did the Podcast Insider show, it took about a week. So they're speeding it up for sure.
It's all different.
So let's talk a little bit about marketing. So McKenzie, you want to lead this off?
Yeah, sure. So once you actually have your podcast ready to go, then you actually need to find people to listen to it. So
usually helps.
Yeah, a big portion of this is social media, but going with the same tactic on every single type of social media platform, or trying to go on all of them, is not necessarily the best way to go about it. There are different people that are going to be drawn to different types of social media places. Like, you can maybe find me on Facebook. I'm mainly there for work at this point. You can find me on, I don't do much on Twitter, but I'm on there all the time. And same with Instagram. You're never going to find me on Reddit ever. So it's just a good example of focusing in on who you think your audience is and one, promoting there, but not spamming there. And also getting a good idea of what would be good topics or the types of people that are there for, pitching their own content, because that's a good way to find people that for guests as well. So it's a lot involved with social media, including scheduling. So,
One thing too is I like, when I started my show back in the old days, because I'm the old curmudgeon in here, all those sites didn't exist. There was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no Instagram. We didn't have that.
iTunes didn't exist.
Right. So we had to go find our communities, had to find where they were. And I think a lot of people don't think outside the box beyond the social media platform. You need to go to where, if you're doing a program on mental health, you need to find, maybe it is now a Facebook group that's about mental health, or maybe it's a diversity group or whatever it may be. You need to go where those folks are at if you're trying to reach, and not just do this, big shotgun blast in the sky and hoping someone's going to pick up that, hey, you've got a show. I think this is true tested advice here is you go in and participate. You don't come into the group and say, hey, I got a podcast, come listen to me, because you have no authority whatsoever with these people. And they're just going to be like, immediately like shut you down and ignore you or put you on blast. So go in and contribute. And when an opportunity arises and a topic comes up and it's, maybe something related to something you talked about in a previous episode. Hey, by the way, in my podcast on episode 82 at 15 minutes and 32 seconds, I talked about this exact topic. And if you have the ability to create a tag for your episode where you can send them to that time snippet, that's a great way to introduce people to your content in a non-spammy way that's actually contributing to a dialogue, and where you then over time build authority for your show, because this is really what it's all about. If you're a new content creator and you've never done content before, maybe you are, maybe you're the expert in your field already and you don't have to build authority, but a lot of podcasters are not. So when you build authority this way, it builds credibility, and the next thing you know, you're being invited for speaking, and so you have to do this. And this can't be done over a week or 2 weeks. This is over a couple of years as you're building your show to build your authority in this space. And for my show, when I started my show, it took me a full 2 years to kind of then, oh man, Todd's the guy I need to call. I got, like, as an example, I got on the BBC call list, and they would call me at 2:00 in the morning and they would say, Mr. Cochran, can you speak on, they would say a topic, let's say this mouse. I'd be like, yep. Even if I didn't know anything about it, I always said, yep. And I would have about 10 minutes to do a few jumping jacks, brush my teeth, Google that topic, and then try to talk intelligently for 3 minutes, of which I got 30 seconds of airtime. So, these types of things happen as you evolve your show. And so social media is great. Promote those little things that happen. But, you have to diversify yourself and find your audience. And maybe then as you build your audience, it gets into the next topic of newsletters and email lists.
Yeah, definitely a big way to continue growing your audience is by building your email list, because that's where you're going to be able to turn yourself into an authority on whatever it is that whatever your topic is. And slowly but surely that will become one of your most valuable assets. And when I say slowly, I mean slowly. Like, unless you go to an event where maybe you have 100 people sign up, it's going to be person by person, maybe 1 or 2 people every once in a while signing up, but it's very helpful.
And those are the type of people that you'll be able to reach. As an example, my email newsletter, I use a Google group that I don't use anything fancy like MailChimp. It costs me no money. I set it up so it sends only. And, I got 3,000-4,000 people that get my show notes. I basically cut and paste out of my blog post and put a little note in there saying, hey, here's the show notes for the show, and here's the link to the episode, is kind of this reminder that the show's out. And that's kind of how I do it. Other people do it as a lead funnel so that they send something off, they bring them back to their website to try to get them as a service. Those are all viable. But, for me, it's been about more of a reminder, hey, there's a new episode. Even though I'm producing twice a week, it's more of a reminder that, hey, there's something new here for you to check out. Mike, have you used much newsletters or email lists at all?
No, not really. My podcasts are more of a hobby variety. So I just sort of, I use subscribe by email, which is our little service. So that's the mail list for the lazy person. It just sends out an email when I put out an episode, and I really don't have any contact with them. So yeah, not really my forte.
But McKenzie, as you said, a lot of podcasters build incredible value out of their email list. Now, I'll give you a point of view from Mike's perspective too. If I'm on your website and I'm in there for 5 seconds and you throw up a thing in my face that says sign up for your newsletter and I've just landed on your homepage,
I'm out of there.
Yep.
I'm gone.
You are definitely that person.
I'm gone because you're not respecting me. You've insulted me by throwing something in my face without me even really looking at your website. Now, I know there's theories on this, but at least me personally, I hate it with a passion and I'll never come back. Whereas if I'm on your website and then they see me heading for the X button to close a tab or out, there's those types of detection systems within these. Then you throw up the hey, sign up for my newsletter. That's a little more acceptable.
Or just ask in your show, hey, sign up, make the link prominent. Don't use any fancy pop it up in your face, because they say these pop-ups will gain you, 50% of the audience will sign up on a pop-up. Yeah, but 50% of them are going to leave immediately. So what did you gain? That's my opinion.
And I won't come back if I've gone to a website and you basically, what you're doing is just like on a podcast, when you waste people's time, they leave. Don't waste people's time in a podcast. Like this session, if we waste you time, you're going to go do something else. So we have to keep moving, keep engaged, keep bringing up new topics. So the same thing with your show.
Yeah,
let's talk about.
Speaking of which, we have a couple of announcements we need to do too before the top.
Right. So we've got about 12 minutes. Let's talk about cross promotions.
Cross promotions are a really great way to market yourself without being on an actual platform per se, because a lot of the time it will be someone else promoting you for you. Right. This is really easy to do on a podcast, kind of buddy up with someone who might have a similar podcast, but you guys are, different enough that you can share an audience. But that way people are going to be like, they're going to trust the recommendation of listening to your show from the other host because they like the other host and they know they wouldn't be promoting something that isn't worth your time. So I think that's a really great way to diversify a little bit and share. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, back in the day when podcasting first started and for several years after, it was promo swaps. You would send somebody a 30-second, 1-minute promo for your show, and you would offer to play it on your show, and that's how you learned about other podcasts. I would listen to promos. Adam Curry would run 2 or 3 promos during his show, way back when it started. And that's how I learned about the other shows that were out there. That's how I learned about Todd, I think, back, way back then.
So the cross endorsements are still good.
Mm-hmm. They seem a little more integrated into networks nowadays.
Sure.
Especially the bigger networks that are coming from, a media
like
institution
or something like that. Yeah,
exactly. They're obviously going to recommend each other, but there's no reason that smaller podcasters like the hobbyist or the independent can't do that too.
So I think what we're going to do is we'll have some time for questions. So we're going to hurry through the next 2 pieces. But Daniel, if you want to full screen me, and then what I'm going to do is we're going to, we ran a competition to give away and take the lower third away. We took ran a competition to give a year's worth of free hosting. And I want to run the winning entry now. So we basically made an announcement on social and everywhere that, if you have a new idea for a new show, send us a video or audio clip. Well, this guy blew us away and won easily. So I'm going to play his winning entry. And if you're going to pitch a show, this is the way to do it. I'm going to tell you, they were already almost ready to launch a show, but we're going to help them even more. So I'm going to play this video from Chuck Fields on a new show that's coming to podcasting that's going to be supported by the Blubrry team. So here we go.
Space exploration is at a historic, pivotal milestone right now. We are almost ready to send humans back to space from the United States. We have reusable rockets. We have active planning going on to return humans to the moon and then later on to Mars. It's my extreme privilege to announce a new project that we're working on. This is a spin-off of our highly successful program, Your Online Coffee Break, which I'm so amazed that we've actually achieved over 100,000 downloads and views. We have listeners throughout all 50 states and 115 countries and counting. And so our new project is going to be focused on the future of space exploration, the leaders who are paving the way for this expansion of humanity. But what's exciting about this new series, which we're calling Your Space Journey, is it's about you too. The journey into space is a humankind voyage. So all of us are members. So not only are we going to be featuring exclusive interviews with some of the cutting edge leaders who are paving the way for this exciting future, but we're also going to share stories of listeners, our listeners, you. We want to hear your story. Whatever stirred your passion in space, we want to hear about it. We have a website now called yourSpaceJourney.com. You can email us at info@yourSpaceJourney.com. You can give us a call at 317-862-4700. But we want to hear your space story. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail or if you'd like to email us an audio or video clip, we'll do our best to share it in a future episode. But what I'd like to share with you now next is our trailer for Your Space Journey. Thank you so much for your support.
Welcome to Your Space Journey, where we venture into the future of space exploration and the incredible leaders who are taking us there.
This really represents the furthest that the hand of man has ever reached in terms of photographing an object in the Kuiper Belt. This has never been done before.
Now, one fundamental research question is really at the heart of many of our missions, and that is a question that we're learning a ton on right now, and it has to do with, is there life out there?
Right.
It's a fundamental research question, if there ever is one.
I think it is the settlement of Mars in particular. While it's possible with existing propulsion, absolutely, you can get to Mars in 6 months with existing propulsion, it will drive the development of advanced propulsion in the same way that European settlement of North America drove nautical technology.
I want to listen to that show right now. This is exciting. So anyway, congratulations to this team. They get a free year of hosting with Blubrry Podcasting. Looks like they don't need any podcasting gear. We'll talk to them about it. Maybe we'll give them a gift certificate. But we're definitely going to also feature them on Podcast Insider, and then they get free consultation with me as well. So anyway, congratulations to that team. Next thing we want to do is we've updated PowerPress 8.0 to 8.0, and we're introducing some new subscribe sidebars. This is a beta, and
we need more beta testers.
Yes, so we're going to show you, and again, I've already provided some feedback, but whoops, wrong window. Let's see here.
Podcast Insider, by the way, is updated.
Yeah, okay, so let me. Oh, it is. Well,
yes.
Let me go to that website then. So hang on.
Darn it, I missed out on some free promotion.
Yeah. So.
For your demo podcast.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what it looks like, the new subscribe site, and we've got widgets galore here. So, and actually, your site might have more of them. It's changed the complete look of the subscribe sidebar. And let me go back to your site. Let me show you all of these. So those of you that use PowerPress now can have really, Deezer by email, iHeart, Stitcher, Android, TuneIn, Spotify. You may not want Pandora. Yeah, you may not want all of these, but they're going to be available. And I've asked the team to tighten up the spacing a little bit and and the reason these buttons are the size they are, let me just explain. People often say, oh, the buttons are too big. Mobile. They're mobile ready. They're designed to be able to click and not miss. So, we're designing everything mobile first. So that is the reason why the buttons are the size that they are. So I think there's two different designs. They can go square or rounded, right?
Yep, and you can also go back to classic, square or rounded, which is the big solid colored ones. In fact, if you go on the more subscribe options link, you can see the classic buttons.
Okay.
I like the ones that we're looking at. They're a little softer.
Yeah,
they are. And these two are like, wow, in your face, right?
Yes.
They're bright.
Yes, and they're just like a blob of color.
So we're looking forward to your feedback on these. And this is new. This is lots of stuff coming into the UI of PowerPress 8.1 is where we're going to really introduce some UI stuff. And then all the way through the end of the year, you're going to see big transformation of PowerPress backend.
Yeah, and there's also going to be some graphical icons underneath the player instead of the textual links, if you want. And there's a few more styling things that are happening, but this initial release right now, Beta 3 is out. We'll have a link to that. I don't know, where would the link be for that?
Yeah, so we'll where is the link to the beta? We're telling everyone about the beta.
I'll throw it up on podcastinsider.com. I'll put a post up there.
There's a whole page to it, and we can just get it out on social.
Yeah, or we put it here in the chat room as well. I know that we're almost out of time. We got 3 minutes really left. Does anyone in the literally they cut us off at 55? Does anyone have any comments from the chat room? I've been watching here. JD had made a comment. He says, if you have the budget, look for opportunities to put out press releases too. High profile guest coverage of an event. We've had news outlets pick up our releases before, not a huge uptick, but every single listener counts. Another thing you can do is when you're getting at a milestone, like show 100 or 200, call your local television station. You'd be amazed how many times they'll come out and shoot in your house for 45 minutes.
Or make you get up at 4 to do the morning show. I've done that before.
Yeah. So there's lots of ways to get promotion. You just have to go out and ask. If you don't ask, you're not going to get access. So anyway, we want to thank everyone here at International Podcast Day. I know all of you are been hanging out with the team. Of course, Daniel's running the helm right now, but Dave and Steve, who spend countless hours getting prepared for this, it's been our pleasure to be a proud sponsor of the International Podcast Day here for 2 or 3 years. But I hope what we gave you today was educational. Again, I'll be back with you at 8 p.m. in what I consider the most important session of the entire event. Of course, that's my personal opinion. And I think if you have time to be here at 8 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Eastern, I think you're going to walk away with some thought processes. Mike, McKenzie, anything while we're in our last 30 seconds?
No,
happy
other
to be
than
here.
yeah, definitely happy to be here. And thanks, Dave, Steve, Daniel, everybody at International Podcast Day.
At blubrry.com or at blubrry or blubrry.com. Thanks, everybody. And use the promo code FOUNDER for 30 days free service. Thanks, Daniel.
Todd, McKenzie, and Mike, thank you so much for your support, for this great presentation, this great information that podcasters definitely need to know. And I hope this will really help podcasters podcast better and help you guys help them better, as well as know the tools better so that we can reach our audiences and engage. A lot of better going on here. And speaking of better, if you want better podcast hosting, then, rolling it on your own, trying those free services that die so often, and so much more that you can get when you go to blubrry.com. And Blubrry has been in this space since forever. And we're so grateful for their platinum sponsorship. And is there a certain URL, Todd, that everyone should be going to for International Podcast Day?
It's the link right below the player. Click on that, and you get your 30 days free locked in right on the link on the banner.
Fantastic. Yeah. So go over there, and we have that link and more over at internationalpodcastday.com. Again, Mike, McKenzie, Todd, thank you so much for joining us for this. We're going to continue on with International Podcast Day and have a lot more coming. The next session will be podcasting in Portugal, and there is so much more great content coming in the International Podcast Day live stream. Make sure that you're using that hashtag International Podcast Day. It's long, but it's descriptive. We've got so much more coming too. Let me read some of these other sessions coming soon. Balancing podcasting into your life, how you can monetize your podcast through social media, augment your personal brand with a podcast. We've got Libsyn coming up. They're our gold sponsor. They'll be talking about podcasting in Spanish, one language, diversity of cultures, and so much more with so many more countries and languages represented too. So keep watching, drink your energy drink, load up on caffeine, sugar, whatever it takes. Keep celebrating podcasting. And most importantly, go out there and help people discover podcasts, discover a good podcast for them. Help them find their next favorite podcast. Keep celebrating podcasting, and we'll be back again with our next session. And if you're on the live page right now and the player or the page doesn't refresh and automatically start, then you might need to refresh that manually and press that play button manually, just in case it doesn't do it for you automatically. Thank you very much for joining us. For Steve and for Dave from the International Podcast Day team, I'm Daniel J. Lewis. Thanks for watching. We'll be back in just a little bit.